Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Michael, for putting this conference together. Thank you for attending. It's good to have everybody here. I know it's in the middle afternoon, you've just eaten, you've had a long day, it's rainy outside, so maybe if everybody could just kind of stretch your arms up, just kind of move your fingers, your digits about like that. Good. My wife Karen wanted to be here today. She couldn't, so I told her that in her absence I would make sure to shake everybody's hands for her. So. Our topic today is it's a serious one. We're looking at big ideas and asking big questions about society and culture and a good society. And as I start my talk, I want to pose an analysis to you on the state of our culture, and I want to use that as a lens through which to address some of the issues concerning marriage and family and other institutions that affect a good society. The proposal is that in the modern West, in our society today, we are experiencing a certain narrowing down, a certain watering down, a certain reduction or restriction of life in two important fronts. First, if we could do the PowerPoint, the first front is what it means to be human, which I think today has been narrowed down, watered down, to kind of the mere functioning of our mental synapses, or perhaps the sum of the pleasures which drive our appetites, so that we are essentially, as human beings, rational, autonomous consumers. The second front, I think that our culture has seen a narrowing down on, is how do we view the world? And I want to propose to you that one way in which the modern West has come to view the world is that we have divided the world into two main realms: the public and the private. Now, we've placed different components into each of these realms, and we have ended up isolating them, divorcing them from one another. In the public realm, we have placed facts, right? Neutral, disinterested facts. And we've opposed those to what operates in the private realm, which are values, opinions, preferences, right? The public realm is the realm where reason operates. The private realm is the realm of faith, which we divorce from reason and oppose to reason as something different, right? The public realm is the world of is. The private realm is the world of oughts. And the public realm is where we do the hard stuff: work, career, job. The private realm is where we go to rest. It's the area of leisure. It's the area of play. In the public realm, the institution that has authority is the state. And we set that over against the institution that exercises authority in the private realm, which is the church. In the public realm, we have politics, science, economics, all of those disciplines which operate according to neutral, disinterested reason, the observance of cause and effect, and that sort of thing. In the private realm, opposed to that is religion, where we talk about purposes, intentions, value, these sorts of things. And so we often end up with a debate, turn on the television and you'll often hear it, between social justice on the one hand and family values on the other. And we often divide up people in terms of what we think they're interested in, what they care about, what they give their lives to, in terms of this split. Either you care about marriage and family and abortion and life and these sorts of things, or you are a social justice type, right? You care about the hard things: poverty, economics, the environment, the things that are really going to affect people's lives. And you're either one or the other, right? And they're often arguing at each other and yelling at each other and at cross purposes with each other. I want to suggest that this is the world in which we live. I want to suggest that this is the reason why you can still be marked wrong in your science class, on your science exam. But you're no longer able to be marked wrong on your ethics or your religion exam, because that's the realm of private preferences, personal opinions. All you can do is talk about how sincerely you believe what you wrote on your ethics exam, right? So there's still room for truth, there's still room for argument, but we've reduced the realm of truth and argument to the public realm, where the realm of facts, the realm of neutral, disinterested reason. But we've separated that apart from the discussions about larger purposes, values, religion, faith. Now, what is the problem with viewing the world in this sort of way? Well, part of it has to do with the fact that I don't think that's the way that we were created as human beings. And second, when you view the world in this way, we come to think in problematic ways about certain institutions and their relationship to the common good. If you view the world in this way, where then do you place the family? And how then do you come to think about the family? Where do you place the university? And how do you come to think about the purpose of higher education? Where do you place the church? What is the church? What is it for? If you view the world according to that sort of split. I want to start with the family. And I want to explore how we come to think about this institution and how it operates according to this lens, this split. I want to do this by telling you the story of a gentleman I met about 5 years ago in a low-income, rundown neighborhood in Dallas, Texas. His name was Roderick. Roderick was on the run from the police because he was a drug dealer. In fact, at one point, Roderick controlled 70% of the drug traffic in his neighborhood. 70%. He had failed out of school. He didn't have a legal job. He was on the run from the law. He was living out of wedlock with a woman with whom he had had 4 children. And he was on government welfare. One night, Roderick walks into his house. And there at 11 p.m. at night, his little 3-year-old, Roderick Jr., is wide awake, sitting there at the living room table. And Roderick sees his 3-year-old, little Roderick Jr., take a piece of newspaper into his hands and begin to roll up that newspaper into the shape of a marijuana joint. 3 years old, imitating what he had seen his father do time after time after time. Now, with all the close calls that Roderick had had with the law, that was the moment that woke him up. That was the instance that caused him to realize something needed to change. Roderick needed help. And he told me about 2 approaches to helping him that he experienced roughly during the same period of time. The first came from the left side of that split. It was a response from the government, the public institution of government to help. The second came from what we would consider to be the right side of that split, an institution that is usually viewed to do other things, to care about other issues. But let's go through them one by one. The approach of government help was through welfare. And the way that it was structured in Dallas was that if you were a family in need or an individual in need, you would receive welfare benefits if you could prove to the government that you did not exceed a certain threshold of income, right? As soon as you stepped over that threshold, made more than that amount, then you would risk losing your benefits, right? So pretty quickly, every woman in the neighborhood of Bonton, which was where Roderick lived, realized that if she were to one day marry a man with a job. Or if she were to get married to a man who one day might get a job at any point in the future, guess what would happen to her benefits? She would risk losing them, right? So guess how many couples living in Bonton that Roderick knew were married? 0. Not one. When Roderick decided to get married, and I'll tell you that story in just a second, the pastor in Bonton had never performed a wedding before in his church. He didn't know what a bridesmaid was. He didn't know what a groomsman was. He didn't know where he was supposed to stand, what he was supposed to say, what they were supposed to do. Marriage just wasn't on the radar screen for anybody in Bonton, a neighborhood in South Dallas, Texas. So what are the chances, right, that little Roderick Jr., growing up in that neighborhood, would view marriage as something to strive for, as something of value, something to hope for, to pray for, to save himself for, financially, sexually, and in other ways? It just wasn't part of the discussion in Bonton, right? Now, consider this. In America, a child who is born and raised outside of marriage is 6 times more likely to experience child poverty than a child who is born and raised in a 2-parent family with a mom and a dad married to each other. Marriage has a lot to do with poverty and well-being. And yet, how many times when you've heard debates or discussions on the news or in your school about poverty, have you ever heard marriage as either the problem or the solution? I just want to show you a couple other points to consider along these lines. These are statistics which hold in America. 71% of poor families with children in America are not married. Right? So if you look at non-poor families, only 26% of them are single. 74%, almost 3/4 of those who are not poor are married, live within a family. If you look at poor families, 71% of poor families in America are headed by single-parent households. Right? Marriage reduces poverty for whites, for Hispanics, and for blacks. And you can look at the difference between white families, those who are married in blue, and those who are not married in terms of percentage of families that are poor. The same sort of ratio tends to hold for Hispanic families, for black families. It's across the board. Next slide. If you look at the mountain of evidence of social science data which has been collected over the past 30 or 40 years, it's all showing that when compared to children in intact married homes, children raised by single parents are more likely to have emotional and behavioral problems, to be physically abused, to smoke, drink, and use drugs, to be aggressive, to engage in violent, delinquent, and criminal behavior, have poor school performance, be expelled from school, and drop out of high school. Marriage and the presence of an intact family relates pretty much to every other category of well-being. Next slide. In fact, according to David Gushee, a researcher in the States, the best predictor of financial well-being for children and women is marriage, while the best predictor of poverty is single motherhood. Marital status has come to exceed education, race, neighborhood, family background, or any other predictor of financial and economic well-being. But again, I ask you, how often do you hear marriage and family in the discussion when people are discussing poverty and social breakdown and economic turmoil and delinquency and dropout rates and these sorts of things? Fortunately, for Roderick and for his children, there was a different approach. Because even though the approach that was taken by the government in Dallas was undertaken out of good intentions, that poverty ended up, or that policy ended up increasing the chances that Roderick Jr. would experience poverty sixfold, right? Through unintended consequences of what it did to marriage in that community. At the same time, in North Dallas, there was a pastor who ran a ministry in Bonton, and he got to know Roderick through that ministry. One weekend, there was a couple from North Dallas who came to the pastor. And their children were moving into college. In the States, children go and live in a dorm on the campus, and so that usually means an empty nest for the parents. And they had some more time, and they wanted to do something to help people in need. So they went to this pastor and they said, "Pastor, we want to do something to help. We'll do anything you tell us to do. You tell us what we can do to make a difference for people in need." And the pastor said, "Okay, here's what I want you to do. Next Saturday, I want you to drive with me down in to a neighborhood called Bonton, because there's a couple there that I want you to have dinner with." I said, "That's it? That's it." So that's what they did. Cheryl and Ron Murph, the next Saturday, drove with the pastor down into Bonton, and they began an approach to caring for people in need and overcoming poverty called double dating. And they went to a restaurant and they had dinner with Roderick and his live-in girlfriend, Lisa. They shared food, they talked, they got to know each other. The next week, they did it again. The next week, they met for dinner. The following week, they met for dinner. And they simply took the time it required to become friends. And they began to trust each other. They began to share their struggles with each other, what it's like raising kids, the different challenges that they were dealing with at that time in their job or in their church or in their neighborhood or whatever. They began to invite each other to their homes to celebrate holiday meals. And over the course of time, through that relationship, they began to help one another. And I asked Cheryl, I said, "What is it? What's the most important thing that you did to help Roderick and Lisa?" And I was expecting her to say, "Well, we bought them a new house," or, we paid for their kids' education or something. They said, "You know what? The most important thing that we did was we lived out in front of them the model of a godly marriage." They did not have that with their own parents, but when we were in their home and they were in our home, we showed them how to pray together, how to divvy up housework fairly amongst each other, how to resolve conflict. And over time, just by living that model out in front of them, the Holy Spirit moved Roderick and Lisa to want to get married. First ones in their neighborhood. And so they did. I'm going to cut out part of the story, but I don't know if you are familiar with the Habitat for Humanity ministry. It's a ministry where those in poverty can help build their own home with other members from the community and the local church, and at the end of that process, they end up owning the house that they helped put their blood, sweat, and tears into. Ron's business was able to sponsor a Habitat for Humanity house for Roderick and his family. So today, little Roderick Jr. and his 3 siblings, they wake up every morning in a house owned by their parents who are married, and they see their dad go off to work and bring home a paycheck to provide for their family. Right? Roderick's family is flourishing. now. Two different approaches, right? From two different parts of the world, as we like to divide it up. Right? One, both undertaken out of good intentions, but one obviously had different effects. The question I want to pose to you about that is, what caused the pastor to suggest the approach to help that he did? If somebody had come to you and said, a middle upper class couple, have some time, have some money, I'll do anything you want me to do to care for people in need, what do you want me to do? What would you have said? See, what caused the pastor to suggest that Ron and Cheryl should begin to have dinner with Roderick and Lisa? The first thing I would suggest is that the pastor knew something about what it meant to be human. Right? What it meant to be human. When the pastor looked at Roderick, he did not just see a clump of material. He did not just see what so many of our approaches to solving poverty see: an empty bank account that simply needs to be filled up with some more money. Right? Or an empty stomach with legs, who simply needs to be filled up with some more food and sent on their way, and everything will have been taken care of. Right? When the pastor looked at Roderick, he saw a human being made in the image of God. He understood that Roderick's poverty was not simply material, because Roderick was not simply a clump of matter. Roderick was a child of the Almighty Creator of the universe. And part of what that means is that a human being, Roderick was a relational being. He was made to flourish in certain kinds of relationships. First and foremost, a relationship with God. But also, he was created to flourish in certain rightly ordered relationships with other people. With his family, with his children, with his neighbors, with the law, with the authorities, with enemies, with the elderly, with the children. God calls us, and Scripture admonishes us, to relate in certain ways with other people. But even more than that, Roderick was created to flourish in a certain relationship with the rest of creation, right? Which includes all of the physical aspects of life, the environment, what Roderick wore, what he ate, the way he used his money, the way he related to firearms, the way he related to music, dance, art, everything else that God created as gifts to promote human flourishing. Roderick was called to relate to in a certain way. Now, why I think the pastor was so wise is that he was able to suggest an approach that could take into account every single dimension of Roderick's need. Yes, Roderick had physical needs, material needs, but Roderick was so much more than that. Okay? He had needs that the welfare system in Dallas, Texas, as it was structured, could not address. But Ron and Cheryl, friends, could address those needs. They could help him in his relationship with God. They could help him rightly relate to his live-in girlfriend, become his wife, his children, his neighbors. They could help him relate well to illicit substances, to money, to buildings, to authority. Right? There are certain institutions in society that are well equipped to address the full human being in all dimensions of flourishing. And we need those institutions, like the family, if we are to recover a good society. So I ask you to look back at the world as we tend to split it up, and look again at the debate as it's posed for us in the modern West. Social justice versus family values. I think what Roderick's story does is it blows that split apart. And it shows that if we truly care for people in need, if we truly care about helping them to flourish, we will invest everything we can into making sure that children have the possibility of growing up with a mom and a dad who are married to each other. It has everything to do with justice for them, right? So the family is an institution that can bridge this split. What about the university? How do we think of the university according to this split? I want to suggest that we've come to the place where we've done exactly the opposite with the university. Whereas we've relegated the family to the private sphere, the university has come to rest at home solely, almost, in the public sphere. Because the public sphere is where facts and reason operate. It's where disinterested knowledge takes place, right? It's where, if you want learning, that's where the institution is that you'll find it. Okay? Now, if you look at this, what then suggests itself as the purpose of the university, of the purpose of the education that the university offers? Right? Well, it's the area of work, jobs, career. And so lo and behold, what you find, I would suggest, in most universities today, they are moving more and more toward understanding education as job training. It's where you go to get the qualifications you'll need to earn an income, period. We've come to view a higher educational degree as merely a passport to personal privilege. The degree has become a hunting license for a job, right? Now, I'm a father. I have kids. I understand the desire for my kids to find gainful employment when they graduate from university, right? So I get that. I understand that. But as a dad, I want so much more for my kids than just a job. Because they are so much more than just empty bank accounts that need incomes, right? I want them to grow to be thoughtful, faithful, curious, confident, well-rounded human beings who enjoy life and who flourish in every single dimension of well-being. I want them to love learning. I want them to love people. And I want them to love the Lord. That's the description of education, true education. Now, looking at the world in which we live, Malcolm Muggeridge came to the shores of Australia in the 1970s, and he looked at this situation. He looked at this kind of modern Western approach to the world. And he was asked, what can we do about it? It's the question we're asking here today in this conference. What can we do in the midst of this sort of society that we find ourselves in? What's the most strategic steps we can take to achieve a good society? And do you know what Malcolm Muggeridge's response was? He said, the most strategic thing you could do in Australia is to start a small Catholic liberal arts college and make sure it flourishes. Now, why? Why would Muggeridge think that that was the answer? Well, one of the reasons is because I think Muggeridge understood that the kind of education you get in a Catholic liberal arts college is a core curriculum that offers an integrated view of the world and of knowledge. It's a kind of approach that rejects the split, that guides the way we understand the purpose of university today. And it says, no, all of these things that we've isolated belong together. And a true and proper education is the one whose curriculum addresses all of that and holds it together. Second, I think that he realized that a Catholic liberal arts college can bring together what we tend to isolate. Reason on one side, faith on the other. Can bring those two together and see that they're not competitors. They work together in the pursuit of knowledge and truth. This is not reason versus faith, but this is the pursuit of a reasonable faith, or faith seeking understanding. This is the approach upon which the Western tradition of learning was founded. This goes all the way back to Augustine and before. Faith seeking understanding. I think Muggeridge also realized that a Catholic liberal arts college can reject the myth that universities can be neutral. They can reside in this neutral, disinterested space apart from questions of faith and value and purpose. And they can just do their job straightforward without needing to answer those big questions. Right? But Muggeridge knew what I'm about to tell you, that no matter what school you go to, if you are in an institution where there's a professor who is older and who has qualifications to determine what books you read in the curriculum and what questions you must answer on the essay and how he's going to spend his time imparting his knowledge to you, you will attend a faith-based university. You will attend a university that trains character education. Right? Value-neutral universities don't exist. The question is not, will you go to a faith-based university? The question is, whose faith? And will the college or university be explicit and honest with you about the faith assumptions that are at work in the teaching there at the college? The way I like to think about it is that education, all true education, is training in citizenship. It's training you to adopt and to be a member of some sort of community. The question is, for which city? The city of God or the city of man? These are the questions I would suggest that good universities must answer. We've talked about the family as an institution that can bridge that split. We've talked about the university as an institution that can bridge that split. What about the church? I'm not going to spend as much time on this, but I'm just going to leave you with a couple things to think about. I want to start by addressing your attention to Ephesians 2. Next slide. And there we read, his purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross. Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, and here it gets interesting, but your fellow citizens with God's people and members of what? A household. You are citizens and members of a household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets with Christ Jesus himself as the cornerstone. So notice what that verse alone is doing. It's saying about the church. It's saying it's not allowing this split between citizenship, public citizenship and membership in a home to rest. It's saying, no, when you're in Christ, those come together. So notice how the church bridges this split. And it brings together and holds together in one the roles of citizenship to the public sphere and member of the household. Just the last verse I want you to look at is this one from 1 Peter. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. And so when we think about the church, when we ask these questions, what is it? Where do we place it? How do we understand the church and its purposes? One starting point is we are the people of God. Now notice what that should mean with our language. We are not a collection of individuals who go to church. Right? We often hear that. Oh, where do you go to church? Where do you go to church? Notice the assumption of the church embedded in that sort of language. What is the church, according to that sort of phrase? It's a building. It's a place. Something we can go to during our private religious times, we can go to on Sunday, and then we can leave it. Right? But if we are the people of God, we are the church. The people of God, and we go to Mass. We go to worship. We go to renew our covenant in public ways, visual ways, with the Almighty Creator of the universe. So don't allow yourself to buy into the subtle cultural pressures that the church should be relegated to the realm of the private. It's a club, a private club, where individuals can go and share with each other their personal feelings and emotions and values and loves. The church is a public body of people with citizenship. And we need to live it out in that sort of way, overcoming the split that would relegate it to the corner. So in closing, to recover a good society, we need to recover institutions like the family, the university, and the church. These are institutions that treat people as more than just material clumps of matter or empty bank accounts. These are institutions that can foster personal connections. These are institutions that can provide models of success and generate hope for the future. These are institutions that can think holistically about people's needs. And these are institutions that involve people in covenant relationships with God, with others, and with the rest of creation. If we are to have a good society, we must recover institutions that can challenge the modern worldview, the modern split, and promote instead what it means to be truly human and a world in which our faith can be lived out in every single corner of life. Thank you.
We'll take maybe 15 minutes worth of questions. Yeah, you too?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
You talk of a Christian humanism, I use that term, and I just encourage it, but just a comment on the term, because sometimes when I use the term, people freak out that we put it as humanism, which is, we identify with secularism.
Right.
So I'm just saying that the term Christian humanism.
Yeah. The key with any ism is to be very careful about the sorts of baggage that go along with that. I mean, any word can raise red flags. The question is that when we use words, we have to explain what we mean by them, and often, the use of words is determined by the company they keep. And so we have to, when we use words like Christian humanism, we have to allow for a verbal context in which we explain what we mean when we say that. And so I think we would start with emphasizing the word Christian. I think we would emphasize the word personal. And we would, talk about the human being in ways that C.S. Lewis did, as deserving the utmost respect and honor and glory. This was the culmination of God's creation. They were made a little lower than the angels, above everything else, and yet, at the same time, responsible for all the evil and brokenness and destruction and ugliness around us. So we need to talk about the person in ways that, the solution is not just a little bit more knowledge, right? A little bit more money, a little bit more distribution of material things. We have to understand the person in terms of who they were created to be in the image of God, and help them to develop their full potential in all of those dimensions. And in that sort of context, then I think we can allow those sorts of terms to find good company. But as a rule of thumb, be aware of any ism. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
Could you say something about the relationship between work, which tends to be the center of public life, and the private lives?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was not more than a century ago where you would have found work on both sides of that split. I mean, oftentimes, for most of human history, people understood the purpose of family as including work and economic production, and you were often trained in terms of your livelihood by your father at home in terms of what he did. So it's a very recent phenomenon in human history where we come to think of the purpose of home and family as being something different. We've allowed those responsibilities to be removed from the family. And then what is left over? Sociologists like Christopher Lasch use the term a haven in a heartless world. Home is now where we go at the end of a long, hard day to unwind, to get away from the rough and tumble of the world, kick up our feet, relax, get along well with the people in the house. And of course, if we find that uncomfortable, well then we'll break our relationships with those people because we deserve a place to go where we can just be free from, all the difficulties of the world and its pressures. That's a very modern way of thinking about family and household. We've allowed work, through the Industrial Revolution and other things to become something that takes place over there for the purposes not related to our family's production and livelihood and that sort of thing, but to make an income. So it just shows the extent to which we've fragmented and isolated all these different parts of our life. God called us to work for 6 days of the week. And by the way, He called us to do this before the fall. Work is good. God created us to flourish by working. Right? And you can find some cultures that kind of view work as, let's do the least amount that we can so that we can maximize our leisure time, and that's what's called the good life. Well, that's not a biblical understanding. Right? The biblical understanding is do good, meaningful work, and work hard, and then celebrate and rest in God's peace on the seventh day. And so we need to not denigrate work. We need to not hand it over to the neutral public square. We need to view that as part and parcel of what it means to be a flourishing human being, and we need to tie it in with the rest of our purposes and communities, including our faith community, our family, our neighborhood, and other things like that. I hope that kind of gets at what you were asking.
This may be leaving the domain of your talk a little bit, but can you comment on the differences between the Catholic and the Protestant concepts of the dignity of work? Like, I've heard of a particularly Protestant work ethic. Mm-hmm. Is there a comparable Catholic work ethic that has any reasonable distinctions?
That's a good question. And I was raised as a Protestant. I came into the church about 5 years ago, and I was raised with that sort of, it's the Calvinists that value the work ethic. It's the Pilgrims that settled America who were, wanting to note that work has value in God's eyes, that sort of thing. Now, you talk about language, and I think certain terms have generated that sort of impression in the Protestant minds. Protestants would look at the way that Catholics use the word religious, and in the Catholic Church it names a particular calling, a particular way of life, living in community, under a certain order, under a certain authority, that sort of, with your life dedicated towards a certain goal, such that you could have people who aren't doing that in what? Non-religious vocations? I mean, so, to Protestant ears that sounds like, wait a second, you're not valuing the person sweeping the floor. You're not valuing the cook in the kitchen. You're not valuing the doctor who's dealing with, bodily fluids and, all the, because you've got your religious callings. And that kind of opened up the way for the Reformation to kind of say, look, we're going to recover the biblical understanding that God created work and values work in any form. God can find value in it because He created it. And He created us to need food, and therefore cooking glorifies Him. He created us to be orderly beings, and therefore keeping house glorifies Him when we do it. These sorts of things. Now, having come into the Catholic Church, I've come to see that that's not what Catholics mean. Catholics understand, the value of God's comprehensive call on all of us, His giftedness to all of us, our responsibility to respond to His call in whatever vocation it be, and that all of it is ordered and to His glory. But I think one of the good books on this is by Brother Lawrence, Practicing the Presence of God. Washing dishes is a way of practicing the presence of God. And so there are those streams, but as we use language that we're used to using in the Catholic Church, we have to be aware of how that's coming across to our Protestant conversation partners. And we have to be aware of what they're looking for, what points they're trying to safeguard. And if we can say we safeguard those too, then we should try to build that common ground quickly, because I think it's there to be built on this point. Good question. Other questions? If not, I'll just end by saying, if you feel the call to social justice, recognize that one of the most important practices you can engage in is family dinner. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan Messmore. I have to admit, over this conference, I mean, hearing all these talks and the different issues that are upon us, I sensed a little fear within myself. But your talk and Robert Haddad's talk reminded me especially that we can learn about this, but we have to have the right launch pad. And the right launch pad is friendship, as Dr. Ryan Messmore mentioned. With that example of the family double dating, just having that friendship there, and just showing someone else by the way you live your life has, tremendous repercussions, long-term effects, which can really change a person's life. And that's what we should really take into mind when, we're learning all these, great insights and topics, but what are we going to do with that? We have to share that with our friends, with our family, with our colleagues, through friendship. Okay. So again, please join me in thanking Dr. Ryan Messmore and all of our speakers today. Come to this website to find the talks that you've heard today. It's just societyandculture.com.au. As I said, the goal of the website is just to host podcasts from all sorts of academics, people of influence, and for the most part, it's in a secular language. So going back to this point, how we're going to start to change the tide, so to speak, through friendship. But before that, we need to form ourselves intellectually. We need to form our core. So this is one way of doing that, okay? Go to the website, like the page, share it with your friends and through social media. Let's get this content out there and start to change the world. For those of you who want to even go further than that, Campion College. There's a great quote from Apple actually, which says, when they invented the iPhone actually, they said it's 1,000 songs in your pocket, okay? Well, I think Campion College goes beyond that. It's 2,000 years to your core, okay? Campion College is all about forming you completely, intellectually, spiritually, and giving you the tools to go out into the world and change it. Right? Some of the content that we study is history, literature, philosophy, science. So you get that really broad education, and all these disciplines give you certain skills, whether it's research, thinking logically, thinking outside the square and creatively. All these skills have value, okay? And many corporations, businesses are looking for such skills. I mean, quoting Steve Jobs again, or paraphrasing, basically, he says that the reason why he's able to create such great products like the iPad and the iPhone is because he integrates the liberal arts with technology, getting that ability to think differently and creatively, and marrying it with technologies, how they create all these unique products. So if you are thinking of education in a different path, consider Campion College. These are just some of the professions which you can get into, but I wouldn't even want to limit you to these, because as I said, Campion is about forming you intellectually, breaking down barriers, creating all sorts of possibilities. And for the most part, for the long term, the ultimate goal, to form your core to change the world, to retain all the values that we hold in Western civilization. Okay? Now finally, I'd like to invite you to join us. Join us in this mission, in a sense, by giving us your details. There's registration forms around on the table there and in the table at the back there. For one, if you're interested in receiving content from us, we frequently run seminars, different conferences, and we'd like to invite you to get involved in what we're all about and changing the world. Secondly, if you're a leader of some sort, a leader in a youth group, or any form of leader, we'd like to do some more work with you. So again, put your details there, or speak with me directly, or Dr. Ryan Messmore, and we'd love to speak with you and just explore some different possibilities. I'd like to thank you all for coming today. The day's cleared up a bit, but this morning it was quite gloomy, like some of the topics. But there's hope, like this afternoon. It's nice and sunny. Well, it's getting there. So thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time. And again, don't forget to share what you've learned today. And I hope to see you all again in the near future. So thank you.